USP Leavenworth, Kansas, America's most notorious federal prison. Where control begins. There is a place in Kansas where the air feels heavier, even before you step inside. From a distance, it looks like an old fortress, quiet, almost forgotten. But that silence is misleading. Because behind these walls, thousands of decisions are made every day, decisions that determine who eats in peace, who gets targeted, and who doesn't make it through the week without a problem. USP Leavenworth is not just one of America's oldest federal prisons. It is one of the most psychologically demanding environments a person can be placed into. And once those gates close behind you, you don't just lose your freedom. You lose control over almost everything. What you eat, where you walk, who you trust, even how long you can look at another man, without it being taken the wrong way. Because in here, the smallest mistake can carry consequences that don't come with warnings. And what makes this place truly dangerous is not just the violence. It's how normal that violence becomes. Before we go deeper inside, follow this journey and share where you're watching from. These stories travel far, but they all lead to places like this. Entering Leavenworth, the first moment everything changes. The first real moment begins in silence. Not complete silence, but the kind filled with tension. Inside a prison transport bus, no one talks much. Some stare at the floor. Others look out through reinforced glass, catching their last glimpse of the outside world. Then the bus slows down. You feel it before you see it. The engine lowers, the brakes press, and suddenly, the outside disappears behind concrete walls. The gate shuts behind you with a deep metallic thud. That sound stays with people. Because it's final. When the doors open, orders come fast. Stand up. Turn around. Step down. No hesitation. Every movement is controlled, watched, evaluated. The guards don't need to raise their voices much. Their authority is already understood. Inside intake, everything becomes procedural. You are searched thoroughly. Not quickly. Not casually. Thoroughly. Because this environment runs on control, and control begins by removing anything unpredictable. Your personal belongings are taken. Your clothes are replaced. Even the way you are addressed changes. Your name becomes secondary. Your number becomes primary. And as this process unfolds, something shifts internally. Because for the first time, it becomes clear, you are no longer part of the outside world. And what happens next is where most people realize they are not prepared for what prison actually is. The first walk, being seen. After processing, there's a moment that feels longer than it actually is. The walk to your unit. It's not far in distance. But psychologically, it stretches. Because this is the moment when you are seen. As you move through the corridors, inmates notice immediately. They don't stare openly. Most of them don't need to. A quick glance is enough. They can tell you're new by how you walk. Too stiff, too unsure, or trying too hard to look confident. Every detail matters. And in those first minutes, without a single word being spoken, people begin forming opinions about you. Some will ignore you. Others won't. Because in a place like Leavenworth, a new arrival is not just another inmate. He is a question. What type of person is he? Does he have backing? Is he alone? Is he useful or vulnerable? And the dangerous part is this, you don't know who is asking those questions. The unwritten system of power. Inside Leavenworth, power doesn't come from official rules. It comes from structure. An unwritten structure that organizes everything. At first glance, the yard looks like a normal open space. Men walking, talking, working out. But look closer, and patterns appear. Groups form naturally, but not randomly. Race often defines alignment. So does geography. So does affiliation. And once those lines are drawn, crossing them is not simple. Each group has its own internal rules. Its own expectations. Its own consequences. And new inmates are expected to understand this, quickly. No one hands you a guide. No one explains it step by step. But mistakes are corrected. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes, very publicly. Because maintaining order inside the inmate population is taken seriously. Not for peace, but for stability. And stability keeps things predictable. But what happens when someone refuses to follow that structure, or doesn't understand it fast enough, is where things begin to shift. Daily life, routine with pressure underneath. Mornings inside Leavenworth don't begin gently. They begin with movement. Metal doors. Voices. Keys. The sound of count echoes through the unit. Every inmate stands by their assigned space. Still. Silent. Waiting. Because count is not just a formality. It is control in its simplest form. If the numbers don't match, everything stops. And no one wants that. Once count clears, movement begins. Breakfast is quick. Efficient. But never relaxed. Because the chow hall is one of the most socially complex spaces in the prison. Where you sit matters. Who you sit near matters more. Some tables are understood to belong to certain groups. Sitting in the wrong place can create a situation instantly. No warning. No explanation. Just a shift in energy that everyone can feel. Work assignments follow. Some inmates move to kitchens. Others to maintenance. Some remain in units. Each role carries a different level of exposure. Different levels of risk. Because movement inside prison is never just movement. It's opportunity. Opportunity for conversation. For conflict. For observation. And throughout the day, one thing remains constant: awareness. Because even when nothing is happening, something is always building. When tension turns into action. Violence inside Leavenworth doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always build slowly. Sometimes, it appears out of nowhere. A disagreement that seemed minor. A look that was held too long. A word interpreted the wrong way. And suddenly, the atmosphere changes. Those who understand the environment recognize it immediately. The shift. The silence before movement. Because when something is about to happen, people create space. Not by running. But by stepping back, just enough. Then it happens. Fast. Decisive. There are no prolonged arguments. No drawn-out confrontations. Just action. And within seconds, it's over. Guards respond. Alarms sound. But by the time control is restored, the message has already been delivered. Because in here, violence is not always emotional. Often, it's strategic. A response. A warning. Or a correction. And once it happens, everyone adjusts. The mindset of survival. Survival inside Leavenworth is not about strength alone. It's about understanding. Understanding when to speak, and when not to. Understanding how to move, and when to stay still. Some inmates try to dominate early. They want to establish presence. Control perception. But that approach carries risk. Because confidence can be challenged. And challenges must be answered. Others take a different route. They observe. They listen. They learn the rhythm of the environment before fully engaging with it. And over time, they become harder to read. Harder to place. Which, in a place like this, can be an advantage. Because predictability can be used against you. And those who survive the longest often understand one simple truth: you don't need to control everything. You just need to avoid losing control. Isolation and what it does to the mind. There is a part of Leavenworth that feels disconnected from everything else. Isolation. Here, the structure of prison changes completely. There are no groups. No yard conversations. No constant movement. Just space. And time. Inmates placed here spend most of their day alone. Meals come through a slot. Communication is limited. And over time, the silence becomes something else. Not peaceful. Not calming. But heavy. Because without distraction, thoughts become louder. Time stretches. Minutes feel longer. Days lose definition. And when inmates return to general population, they carry that experience with them. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes visibly. Because isolation doesn't just separate people physically. It changes how they think. The system that never stops. USP Leavenworth is not defined by a single moment. Not by one event. Not by one story. It is defined by its consistency. A system that operates every day, without pause. Where structure replaces freedom. And awareness becomes survival. For those inside, the challenge is not just enduring time. It is navigating an environment where every decision carries weight. And where mistakes don't always come with second chances. Because once you are inside this system, the question is no longer how long you will stay. The question becomes, what will you become before you leave? What really controls the prison? The economy nobody talks about. Inside Leavenworth, money doesn't disappear. It changes form. There is an official system, commissary accounts, limited purchases, controlled access. But beneath that, there is another system. A quieter one. An inmate economy that runs parallel to everything the prison controls. Ramen noodles become currency. Coffee holds value. Stamps, snacks, even hygiene items, they all carry weight. Because when access is limited, value increases. And value creates power. Some inmates learn this quickly. They don't rely on physical strength. They build influence through supply. They lend items. Trade favors. Create small debts that grow over time. And those debts are never forgotten. A simple loan, just a few items, can turn into something much bigger. Because repayment is expected. Not eventually. But exactly when agreed. And if it isn't met, the situation changes. What started as a quiet exchange becomes pressure. Then attention. And sometimes, something much worse. Because in here, owing the wrong person is not just uncomfortable. It's dangerous. And what most people don't realize is this: some of the most powerful individuals inside Leavenworth don't look powerful at all. Informants, silence, and consequences. There is one rule inside Leavenworth that stands above almost everything else. Silence. Not the silence of isolation, but the silence of information. Who talks? Who shares? Who reports? Because in this environment, information is sensitive. And being labeled the wrong way can change everything overnight. Inmates are constantly aware of who they speak to, how long they speak, what they say. Because even the perception of cooperation can create suspicion. And suspicion spreads quickly. Sometimes without proof. Sometimes without reason. But once it exists, it's difficult to remove. Those who are seen as informants are treated differently. Distance forms. Conversations stop. Eyes linger longer. Because trust, once broken, or even questioned, is rarely restored. And in a place where trust is already limited, losing it completely can leave someone exposed. Which is why most inmates follow a simple principle: say less, observe more. Because in Leavenworth, words can travel faster than actions. And sometimes, they carry heavier consequences. Lockdowns, when everything stops. There are moments when the entire prison shifts instantly. No warning. No build-up. Just a command. Lockdown. Movement stops. Doors close. Every inmate returns to their assigned space. And within minutes, the entire facility becomes still. But this stillness is different. It's not calm. It's controlled tension. Because lockdowns don't happen without reason. Sometimes it's a fight. Sometimes something larger. Sometimes, something the inmates don't fully understand yet. But they feel it. Because during lockdown, information disappears. No yard. No work. Limited communication. Just waiting. Hours pass. Then days. And inside those cells, thoughts begin to build. Questions form. Speculation spreads quietly between walls. Because when control tightens like this, it usually means something significant has happened. And when the doors finally open again, the atmosphere is never quite the same. Power without visibility. Not all influence inside Leavenworth is visible. Some of it is quiet. Calculated. Built over time. There are individuals inside who don't need to raise their voices. They don't need to prove anything physically. Because their reputation has already done that. They understand the system deeply. They know how conflicts start. How they spread. And more importantly, how to stop them before they escalate. Other inmates recognize this. Not out of fear alone. But out of understanding. Because stability benefits everyone. And those who can maintain it, hold a different kind of authority. But that authority is fragile. It depends on perception. Consistency. And control. Because the moment it slips, someone else will step forward. And in an environment like this, power never stays unclaimed for long. The psychology of time and pressure. Time inside Leavenworth changes people. Not always visibly. But internally. At first, many inmates measure time in days. Then weeks. Then months. But eventually, those markers lose meaning. Because the structure never changes. The routine repeats. And over time, the mind begins to adapt. Some become more disciplined. More controlled. They focus on routine. On consistency. On maintaining stability within themselves. Others struggle. The repetition becomes heavy. The lack of control builds frustration. And without an outlet, that frustration can turn inward. Or outward. Because in an environment like this, pressure doesn't disappear. It accumulates. And how someone handles that pressure often determines how they survive. Escape, the idea that never leaves. Leavenworth was built to prevent one thing above all else. Escape. The walls are high. The security is layered. The surveillance is constant. But the idea of escape never fully disappears. Over the years, there have been attempts. Some planned carefully. Others driven by desperation. Most fail. Not because of lack of effort. But because the system is designed to anticipate movement. To detect change. To respond quickly. And yet, the thought remains. Because for some inmates, the idea of leaving on their own terms becomes something they can't ignore. Even if the risk is extreme. Even if the outcome is almost certain. Because in a place where control is absolute, the desire to reclaim even a small part of it can become powerful. Release, the unknown outside. For those who eventually leave, the transition is not simple. The outside world hasn't stopped. But for them, time has moved differently. Decisions that were once automatic now require thought. Freedom feels unfamiliar. Even overwhelming. Because inside Leavenworth, every moment was structured. Every movement controlled. And outside, that structure disappears. Some adjust. Slowly. Carefully. Others struggle. Because after years of living in a system built on rules, uncertainty can feel more difficult than confinement. And that is one of the realities few people consider. Leaving prison doesn't always mean leaving its effects behind. What Leavenworth really is. USP Leavenworth is more than walls. More than cells. More than the individuals it holds. It is a system of pressure, structure, and adaptation. A place where behavior is shaped not just by rules, but by environment. Where survival depends on awareness, and mistakes carry weight that extends far beyond the moment they happen. For those inside, it becomes a reality they must navigate every day. And for those outside, it remains a place most will never fully understand. Because what happens behind these walls is not just about confinement. It's about transformation. Sometimes controlled. Sometimes unpredictable. And once that process begins, it leaves an impact that doesn't always end at the gate. The incidents, the legends, and the lasting impact. When control failed, the 1901 uprising. Long before modern surveillance systems, before advanced security protocols, Leavenworth faced one of its earliest tests. In 1901, tensions inside the prison reached a breaking point. Conditions were harsh. Discipline was strict. And frustration had been building quietly among the inmates. What started as resistance quickly escalated. An uprising. Not organized in the way modern systems would expect, but driven by shared pressure. Inmates pushed back against authority. Movement became unpredictable. Control began to slip. And for a brief moment, the structure that defined the prison was no longer stable. Guards responded with force. Order was eventually restored. But the message was clear: even in a place built for control, control is never absolute. That lesson stayed with Leavenworth. And it shaped how the prison would evolve in the decades that followed. Because from that point forward, every system, every rule, every layer of security, was built with one goal in mind: never let that happen again. The names that passed through. Over time, Leavenworth became more than just a prison. It became a destination for some of the most well-known criminals in American history. Not because it was famous, but because it was trusted to hold them. Men like Al Capone passed through its system during their incarceration. So did George "Machine Gun" Kelly, a name that once carried fear far beyond prison walls. And later, figures like James Earl Ray were held within federal facilities connected to this system. But here's what's important: inside Leavenworth, reputation changes. Names lose their external meaning. Because inside, everyone enters the same structure. The same rules apply. The same expectations exist. And while history may remember these individuals for what they did outside, inside these walls, they had to adapt like everyone else. Because no matter how powerful someone once was, Leavenworth reduces everyone to the same reality. And that reality does not care about reputation. The closest thing to escape. There have been attempts to escape Leavenworth. Some carefully planned. Others driven by impulse. But one thing connects them all: very few succeed. The prison's design makes it extremely difficult. Multiple layers of security. Controlled movement. Constant surveillance. Even reaching the outer perimeter requires navigating systems designed to detect the smallest irregularity. But that hasn't stopped inmates from trying. Because for some, the idea of escape becomes more than a plan. It becomes a focus. A mental anchor. Something to think about, refine, revisit. Even if they know the odds. And sometimes, the attempt itself is not about success. It's about control. Reclaiming a moment of decision in an environment where decisions are limited. But most attempts end the same way. Quickly contained. Followed by consequences that extend far beyond the attempt itself. Because in Leavenworth, even thinking about escape carries a cost. When the mind changes before the person does. One of the least visible effects of Leavenworth is psychological. It doesn't happen immediately. It builds over time. The structure. The routine. The constant awareness. All of it shapes how a person thinks. How they react. How they interpret the world around them. Some inmates become more controlled. More calculated. They learn to manage emotion. To suppress reaction. Because reacting impulsively in this environment can lead to consequences that are immediate. Others experience something different. A gradual shift inward. Less communication. Less engagement. More time spent thinking, replaying, analyzing. Because when the environment doesn't change, the mind becomes the only place where variation exists. And that can be both stabilizing and dangerous. Because over time, the line between adaptation and transformation becomes difficult to see. The unseen moments. Not everything inside Leavenworth is documented. Not every moment is recorded. Some of the most important events happen quietly. A conversation that changes a situation before it escalates. A decision to walk away instead of respond. An understanding formed between individuals who don't need to explain it. These moments don't make reports. They don't appear in records. But they shape the environment just as much as anything else. Because in a place like this, what doesn't happen can be just as important as what does. And those who understand that often navigate the system more effectively. What Leavenworth leaves behind. For those who leave Leavenworth, the experience doesn't stay behind. It follows. Not always visibly, but internally. The habits remain. The awareness stays. The understanding of how quickly situations can change doesn't disappear. Some use that experience to rebuild. To create structure in a different way. Others struggle to adjust. Because outside, the rules are less defined. Less immediate. And after years of living in a system where everything had a consequence, that difference can feel disorienting. Because Leavenworth doesn't just contain people. It reshapes them. USP Leavenworth has stood for over a century. Through changes in law, through shifts in society, through generations of inmates who have passed through its system. And yet, its core remains the same. Control. Structure. Adaptation. For those inside, it becomes a reality they must learn to navigate. For those outside, it remains a place defined by distance. But the truth is, Leavenworth is not just a location. It is an environment that reveals something deeper. About pressure. About behavior. About what people become when control is taken away. And once someone has lived inside that reality, a part of it never fully leaves. If you made it this far, you've seen what life inside USP Leavenworth really looks like, beyond the walls, beyond the headlines. Stories like this remind us that prison isn't just about time, it's about what that time does to a person. If this documentary gave you a new perspective, stay with us for more real, in-depth stories like this. And before you go, where are you watching from?